There are games out there that are meant to offer you in-depth single-player experiences. Experiences that are meant to be offered by just one person, offering deep, unforgettable, and magical experiences that'll stick with you until the very end. It's always been that way, and will continue to be that way for years to come. And then you have games like this. And before you ask, yes, I did purposely set up this intro just so I could bring up Mario Party 9 into the topic. Man, what a great start to the video. So Mario Party 9, single-player games, at least a good majority of the ones I know, are meant to offer you dozens, if not hundreds of hours worth of deep gameplay, good storytelling, and memorable characters and environments. Games like pretty much any of the Zelda games, for instance, do exactly this. But there's also games that are not meant to be all that deep by being a game that can be easily accessible for anyone to play. Gameplay that isn't really meant to be all that immersive, and a game that can be or thrives on being played by multiple people. These are what we as the gamers would call the multiplayer games as opposed to the single-player games. And for today's topic, I thought it'd be interesting to discuss whether I prefer either single-player or multiplayer games. Both have their own strengths and weaknesses that makes choosing between them pretty tough. But what's also kind of tough about this topic is that there are games that can be both single-player and multiplayer-based titles. The game might have a big, sprawling single-player campaign with extra side modes centered around multiplayer, or it could be a multiplayer-based game with a big single-player campaign on the side, or it could be just a single-player game that can be played by multiple people. Now, I love a lot of the games that are like this, well, mostly. But there's also a lot of games that aren't very deep and are very accessible to everyone and are single player only. Take games like Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine, for example. Though there's not really a whole lot of 3D platformers that have multiplayer in them, and if they do, they don't really thrive on it as much, with a few exceptions, of course. But 3D platformers are mostly just single-player games through and through, and it's mostly the 2D platformers that are more multiplayer-oriented. Which makes sense, because a lot of 3D platformers, not all but some, wouldn't work very well if they were multiplayer-oriented. Maybe if it was like a side mode or a game like Mario 3D World, where the levels are set up like a 2D game but played in a 3D perspective. But if it's a game where you're exploring a big sprawling level, collecting trinkets with multiple people on a single screen, then I don't know, I feel like it probably wouldn't work very well with multiple people. Some games like the Mario Galaxy games try something like this, but to me, calling something like that multiplayer is like calling Tetris 99 a bad game, or calling the Wii remote a TV remote, or even, calling the Wii U gamepad's TV remote feature bad. Nobody could be that cruel. But 2D platformers that are multiplayer oriented works a lot better. I mean, it's definitely possible to make a fun multiplayer-based 3D platformer, as again, games like Super Mario 3D World has proved that. But those aren't as common as 2D ones. There are a lot of incredibly fun multiplayer-based 2D platformers. Though certain 2D platformers aren't very multiplayer-oriented, there's still a lot that are incredibly well-made and fun. Say what you want about the new Super Mario Bros. Games, but those games' multiplayer are some of the most fun I've ever had playing a video game. I'm easier to please than I thought. Now let's move off of 2D and 3D based topics, because I'm just too darn tired. The big single player games that I already mentioned that are meant to be, well, single player games, are usually very good. But when they try to force some kind of multiplayer mode just to say that this game can be played in both single player and multiplayer, even if the campaign can only be played by one person, feels very cheap and just makes the multiplayer mode just feel so tacked on, or vice versa with multiplayer games. It's always very annoying when this happens because yeah, I get the developers probably want to have both single player and multiplayer gamers accommodated, but if you can't get the single player / multiplayer mode to live up to the rest of the game, then honestly, why even bother? Again, I understand that they do it to add more value to the package, and there's definitely a lot of games out there that does it really well, but more often than not, I've encountered games that are mainly focused on one thing not do the other thing as good. Though again, despite some poor efforts, there are still a good amount of games that does both really well, though some multiplayer based games like Mario Party, sure they might have a single player campaign or whatever, but at its heart, it's still meant to be a multiplayer based game at the end of the day. And most of those kind of games do give you the option to play the multiplayer based modes alone or in single player if you want to stick to the terms used in the video. I know I probably won't. But without multiple people, these games just becomes an absolute slog and just not fun at all, which I personally feel is the reason why some multiplayer-based games like Smash Bros. Has extra modes or single-player campaigns on the side, because they know the players won't get much out of the multiplayer-based modes if they're playing alone. But let's say you don't feel like putting up with the single-player nonsense and just want to do the multiplayer but have no one else for you to do it with. Welcome to my world. Then you could play against CPUs, which are not fun and never will be fun no matter how much I get the illusion that I'm playing against living, breathing people when I'm just going against stupid computers. Okay, I hate video games now. But if you don't want to put up with that either, then that's where a little thing I like to call online play comes in. Usually if I want to play competitively with other people and have no one around to do it with me, I usually just connect online and play against other players around the world. It's pretty fun because I know I'm playing against actual people, so it makes you feel like there's a point to strategizing and doing all that compared to a CPU-controlled player. But if you have bad internet or no internet at all, I am so sorry. With single-player games, you don't have to worry about that. Instead, what you'd probably worry about is not being able to play this with multiple people unless there's a multiplayer-based mode to it. But I mean, you get what you pay for. And not having a multiplayer-based mode in a single-player-oriented game is what you spent $60 on, right? And I get you're probably not going to get the same level of fun out of it as a multiplayer game, but man, there's just so many good single-player games out there that I utterly had some of the best time in all of gaming with. Same thing with multiplayer games, though I have a lot more nostalgia for the more multiplayer-oriented games like Mario Kart Wii, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and Wii Sports than I do with the more single-player-y games, though I still have a ton of nostalgia for those games like Super Mario Galaxy, as I played that game a ton as a kid, as all humans born in 2004 would do. But here's the thing, though. I think I have more nostalgia and fun memories with the more multiplayer-based games than I do with the single-player games. A lot of the big single-player games I've played are some of the best games I've ever played, no doubt about it. But man, I'm sorry. I think I prefer multiplayer games at the end of the day just due to how much fun I've had with them compared to the single-player games. It was a close tie, really, it was. I love both single-player and multiplayer-based games equally. But when it comes down to nostalgia, I'd personally say multiplayer games basically reign superior. At least in my opinion. I said in my opinion! Both kinds of games are really solid, but to me, multiplayer-based games are superior. I think single-player games do a better job of offering deeper, grander, stronger, more exciting experiences than multiplayer-based games do, probably because that's not what a lot of multiplayer-based games try to do, but multiplayer games offer, to me, much more hilarious, memorable, and easily the biggest factor in all this, fun experiences just due to the fact that I'm playing with multiple people, which, let's be honest, is always going to be more fun than playing alone. But single-player games still do offer a lot of fun, though. That definitely varies depending on the game, because if this was decided based on experience... Could you tell I hate video games? And that's going to wrap up today's video. If you enjoyed the video, then please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos on my channel where you'll find more videos like this one. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.